Okay, I think we're ready now.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, councillors, and good morning to everyone watching on the live stream, and welcome to the Community Services meeting, additional meeting that we've scheduled for the 7th of January. Do we have any apologies of absence?
Yes, just one, Councillor Chris Wall.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest?
No.
And therefore, to receive written requests for dispensation for disclosure of pecuniary interest, as far as I'm aware, there are none. And so therefore we don't need to grant any. Is there any public participation?
There is not today, no.
Thank you very much. Item 6 then, to approve the draft open minutes of the Community Services Committee meeting held on the 8th of December 2020. Is everyone okay to approve those, or are there any issues that we wish to discuss? Councillor Howe.
Can I just clarify that I was for the cemetery, the group looking to look at the fees for burials, that was intended to be a task and a finished group and not the resurrection of the working party. So the idea being is that it is formed for a purpose, which is looking at the fees, and then it ceases to exist. It brings back its recommendation and then it ceases to exist.
Right. Okay. So we're actually, we don't want to resurrect the previous one. Then we just want.
That's not what I was proposing. We may want to do that, but that's not what I was proposing.
Okay. Councillor, thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Voss.
Yeah, I just referring to the item on the cemetery pickup truck. I see at the beginning of the year there's been an awful lot of new information hitting press about these kind of vehicles. Clearly, without making a pun, electric vehicles and working electric vehicles are gathering apace. So it may take a little more time, I'm guessing, Councillor Taylor, to gather that kind of information together. But it's clearly something that's going to be relevant this year more so than has been hitherto.
From a commercial vehicle perspective, I think I actually highlighted that at the last meeting, is the fact that currently in the UK, predominantly all of the electric vehicle production and prototyping is not in the commercial area, other than one company which is based in Banbury, and they are purely looking at larger vehicles than we would be contemplating purchasing. However, there are large projects in the States which I'm sure will eventually filtrate into the UK.
That's what. When do you think that might be, Councillor Taylor? Do we have an idea in the time
Well,
scale?
for example, probably the fastest moving company at the moment is a company called Arrival, and they're not planning to make any commercial electric vehicles until September 2021, and that's in the USA. So I think it's going to be 2022 really before we see the type of vehicle that we're looking for hit the UK market.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Voss. Mr. Mayor.
Similar comment on the pickup, which we did say that further information would be brought back to this meeting, but I can't see anything on the agenda. I've not seen anything, and as we are discussing budgets for the next year, it's an item that's relative to the discussion. So, is there any update on its status?
With regards to an electric vehicle?
No, with regards to replacement of the pickup, yeah.
Well, I think at the last meeting, obviously there was a budget for, and I think it was for the actual mayoral car that had been put in there. Correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Howe, it was 15,000 or so.
Yeah, the single reserve for all vehicles.
looking initially from the last meeting, when I looked at initial costs of similar vehicles that were out there, they were more expensive virtually to if we were interested in purchasing a vehicle, for example, then the cost of a second-hand up-to-date pickup vehicle of a similar design would have been close to that £15,000. However, I haven't managed to get any. I didn't look at lease figures, so perhaps maybe I need to further the research that I've done on second-hand vehicles on different types of pickups.
Yeah, I think probably the question is, do we know whether we actually need to replace the pickup in the next 12 months, or is it something that just needs to be on our radar?
Well, personally, Lisa, would you like to?
Yeah, I think that was something we also agreed to take to the task and finish group, to sort of bring more research to that we could then feed into a future meeting of the Community Services Committee.
Councillor Cleave, and then Councillor Voss.
Yeah, sorry, because I don't know if we're actually debating it, because we're just approving the minutes.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
So yeah, so are we going to discuss this in the budget? Because I'll save my comment till. Yeah, okay, I'll save my comment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Voss.
Yeah, I'm happy to. If we're going to talk about that, we'll save it to that point.
Yeah, because we are actually only approving the minutes at this stage, technically. So can we vote on approving those, please? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Item 7, to adopt the draft notes of the subgroup meetings reporting to the Community Services Committee already circulated, and that's 7.1, the Climate Change Emergency Panel held on the 9th of December. Does anyone have any comments, or can we approve the minutes, please?
Councillor Fradley has her hand up.
I can't see that, sorry.
Should have put
Councillor
my hand up.
Fradley.
It's just, we are trying quite hard to move forward on this at the moment, and we're trying very hard to start our first mini meadow. I don't know if the town clerk's got anything further on that, or whether that's appropriate at this time. It has taken a bit of time to get it to get things going for various reasons, but we are hopeful that things are on the move.
Thank you, Councillor Fradley. Can we approve the notes then, please? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Item 8, budget review. To review the budget progress for the current financial year 2021 and to determine the budget requirements for 21-22. Appendix A, 8.1, budget proposal, 5th draft. Appendix B. Phil, would you like to, Deputy Town Clerk, would you like to just give us an update, please?
Thank you, Chair. Really, I haven't got anything further to add to my report in terms of the budget situation in the current year. As my report says, the deficits in income are continuing, obviously because of the restrictions as a result of the coronavirus pandemic and lockdown. So unless there are any other questions on the sort of year-to-date review for the current year, then I have nothing further to add, really.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Town Clerk. Does anyone have any comments then that we wish to debate on the budget, or questions for Deputy Town Clerk? Town Clerk, Madam Town Clerk.
Just please that members are mindful of the report coming up about the boundary wall at Holy Trinity Church.
Thank you, Madam Town Clerk.
If I can just add then, in terms of the budget, budget proposal presented for next year, which obviously is a big focus of this meeting, members will see that there, as things stand, there is a very substantial budget deficit, on the assumption that the precept is only raised by 1.5%, which is as it was last year. As I say in my report, that is not a recommendation, that is just an assumption that I've made in calculating a figure to include in the budget proposal. Effectively, a 1% increase in the precept, now that we know what the tax base is, raises just over £5,000 in additional income next year. So you can see, members should be able to see that if you like to claw back some of that deficit, the precept would have to be raised by a significant amount. But that is just an observation, not a recommendation. There are currently sufficient general reserves to cover the deficit. There are also substantial reserves in the building maintenance designated reserve to cover ongoing works with the town hall planned maintenance. So again, the budget as it stands can be covered by reserves, but it will result in a significant depletion. The big challenge, obviously, in the current environment is that we don't really know when current restrictions will lift. So it's very much guesswork on what the potential income might be next year. We've seen in the current year that expenditure can decline if restrictions continue. Obviously, things like civic events, if they don't happen, then the money doesn't get spent. But there are obviously fixed costs that will be incurred regardless of what happens next year. So those need to be considered. Any requirement to increase designated reserves or assign a new designated reserve for this committee's use will have to come from the general reserve. So again, that needs to be borne in mind, unless there is a recommendation to raise the precept in order to create a new pot, which is along the lines that we've been doing now for the last few years for election expenses and for vehicle replacement. I know it's actually the item when we come on to talking about cemetery, but just one point I'd make. I must I apologise. In my report that I stated that the costs for additional curbing in the cemetery weren't included in the budget, but the draft, this fifth draft, I think it's a new record for the number of drafts, and there'll be more to come. That does actually include the costs that we're going to talk about later. But as the town clerk raised another item further down on the agenda regarding the wall at the Holy Trinity Church, those sums currently aren't included in the budget version that you're looking at. So unless you've got any questions, I will stop talking at this point.
Thank you, Deputy Town Clerk. Councillor Voss.
So are we now going to have a discussion, debate, conversation about the possible proposal that we increase the precept? I think it's relevant and important to do so. Is that where we should go now, Councillor Chair?
I think it's potentially we could discuss it, but
we have to make up our mind now. Is this the meeting at which we have to agree it or disagree it? Or
Chair, sorry, through you, if I may.
I think it's not on the agenda.
No, it's actually it will actually be at the Finance Committee meeting next week, where the recommendation on the precept will be agreed. But this committee obviously can post their view or propose their view through to the Finance Committee for consideration as part of the recommendation. I would really suggest this meeting needs to focus on the budget requirements that this committee has responsibility for. So, in other words, for example, the point raised about potential replacement of the cemetery vehicles, if this committee believes that should be added, then that currently isn't covered. I can confirm that my recollection is that the cemetery foreman has said that the pickup I believe, was MOT'd, and there was MOT'd, I think, in December. Early January. So last month, there was some additional costs in getting it through the MOT, but the view was that it's now good for 12 months. So in terms of an urgent requirement to replace it, that I don't believe that is the case. But you will see from costs incurred to date that, again, the costs of maintaining older vehicles are obviously higher than they would be on a new vehicle. But yeah, sorry, this meeting I think needs to focus on the items within the budget for which it's responsible, in order that they can then make their proposals, so that when finance consider the budget, they will have taken account of any items raised today. And I will release another version of the budget before next week to obviously reflect any comments and feedback that come from this meeting.
Thank you for that clarification, Deputy Town Clerk. Does that answer your question, Councillor Voss? Thank you. Mr. Mayor, and then Councillor Fradgley.
Yeah, thank you. Question for Deputy Town Clerk, really. Just as a matter of process for this committee, should we be looking to set the budget for the things that we would like to do? So, and then if there is a substantial deficit that needs to go out of reserves, it's for the Finance Committee to then say, to send it back to say you can't have all your money. And I'll use the cemetery as an example, because we put aside 14,000 for curbing and 3,000 for CCTV, that's something we would like to install and do in the next year, but actually it's not essential. So if there was a real issue with the deficit, that's probably something that we could defer to a future year. But as far as this committee is concerned, we should ask for that money to go into the budget, because that is money that we would like to spend, and the decision on the deficit is for finance to rule. Is that the way we should be approaching this discussion?
Yeah, I believe so. The various committees put forward their spending requirements, and the Finance Committee can determine how those spending requirements can be met. As I say, given that the current, unless substantial budget cuts were placed across the board, then as things stand, these additional requirements can be covered by the significant reserves council holds. But as you've stated, if this committee says what they would like to do, if at the Finance Committee the decisions are that the running down of the existing reserves become too burdensome and don't allow for any future spending requirements, then potentially the Finance Committee could either recommend a significant rise in the precept to cover the additional expenditure, or maybe even advise council that these proposals cannot be met in the forthcoming year and still adhere, for example, to the reserves policy and requirements for future spending. So at that point, if it became a unsustainable budget, then it would have to get referred back for committees to decide what items of expenditure they could potentially defer or do without. Yeah,
okay, that's good. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Deputy Town Clerk. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Fradgley, please.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that the Climate Change Committee proposes a budget of £10,000. That was in the budget from last year, and presumably that has gone back to reserves, and we put in a new request for £10,000 to take us forward to the following year. I'm also terribly aware that we have got to be really conscious of how much we are going to spend over the next year, because I don't think our finances are going to get any easier over the next few years. And I do think at some point we've got to consider putting aside money to go into reserves, as we did in the past. I'm well aware of the history of all this. We actually started out 20 odd years ago with nothing in reserves and built up a very healthy reserve, which actually has enabled this council to be very proactive. And we mustn't lose sight of the fact that that reserve allows us action in the future. So we might have to be withdrawing some of our expenditure in the present sort of climate. A rather gloomy comment, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Councillor Fradgley.
Sorry, Chair, could I just respond to that?
Yeah.
I would just make the point that for the last few years, this council has been running a budget deficit. So, for example, when Councillor Fradgley says that the £10,000 from the climate change for this year, if it's not spent, will go back into reserves. That's not strictly true, because effectively we are running a budget deficit. So what it means is we haven't spent that £10,000 that we would have had to take out of the reserve. So it's not, by not spending this money this year, it's not actually increasing our reserves. It's just it's reducing the amount that we are have to take to cover.
It's reducing the deficit in effect. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Town Clerk. Thank you, Councillor Fradgley. Councillor Cleeve, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just referring back to what Mr. Mayor said and about the cemetery, the cemetery and the CCTV and the curbing. I agree that the curbing is probably not necessary, and therefore we could put that back, because if it's more for an aesthetic rather than safety, then it's not necessary at this point. But I believe because of what has gone on there, that the CCTV might still be necessary. So I think we need to consider that. However, I appreciate on the current budget, we haven't got, we were talking about the wall in the cemetery, that again, if it's a safety issue, we should look at. Basically, at the moment, we should look, everything that is safety, we should still consider. Anything that's aesthetic, we might want to put off for now. But I also think, just going back to the pickup truck, we might have got a 12-month grace. However, that's a working vehicle, and that should take priority over any of the mayor vehicle as well. So I think that we should, if we're going to look at a vehicle fund, it should be the pickup truck, which is working and does a daily job, as opposed to the mayor's vehicle. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleeve. Councillor Howe, did you?
No, I was going to comment on the curbing, but I'll save that until the agenda item.
Okay. Does anyone else have any more comments on the budget then? I'm just looking. No. Do we wish to approve that proposal, fifth draft, then, or not? Yes. Councillor Howe.
Sorry, just to clarify that the items later on in the agenda will additionally be added to that budget if we.
Yes.
If we
yeah.
Wonderful.
Councillor Cleeve.
Yeah, no, it was the same thing, because obviously, yeah, what we will be talking about.
Yeah, the other item is on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, sorry, just a point of clarification on the town hall maintenance. We've got 127,000 in. I assume that all the the cost for all the internal work will be met out of this year's budget. Is that right? And are we happy that 127,000 is the correct figure to cover all of the external works that are proposed? It's just a sanity check on the 127,000. That's still, we'd still consider that to be adequate.
If I can just respond on that,
yes, sure.
You're correct. Yes, the costs of the internal decorations will come out of this year's budget, which so the actuals for this year are expected to be significantly below the budget figure, because obviously that was originally intended for the external works. In terms of how accurate that 127 for next year is, it was actually based on previous budget estimates rather than, if you like, finalised quotes for all the work that needs to be done. So it could potentially not be enough, or it could require works to be, scheduled over a further period, or even reviewed at some point, during the course of next year. As things stand, I don't believe we've got a definitive start date for any of the work. So, as I say, it was based on the best accurate estimates at the time that it was put in place, but there is no guarantee. It's not as a result of all the works being fully costed and included. So it is liable. It potentially could change.
Yeah, it's just a question, in a way, relates back to my previous point, is are we better off from a budgetary perspective in your position of actually saying, let's put 140,000 in there to make sure we cover it, rather than putting 127,000 in and having to go to finance for the top up from reserves later in the year. It's just what's the best way of approaching it?
I think you could perhaps include an additional amount in your request for a designated reserve that could then potentially be used. If you like, the downside of inflating the projected costs to ensure there is sufficient in the budget could result in a decision made on the setting of the precept or future reserves, which, if you like, is not based on the known facts at the time. So, for example, you could say, well, let's allow 200,000 because if we don't spend all that, then it will end up in the reserve. But then obviously making decisions about what the precept should be and what level of reserves we need going forward, that then becomes more guesswork, if you like. So.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. In a way, it was what was the best approach? Do we stick with 127 and ask for a top up later in the year? If that's your advice, then that's fine with me.
I think given the level of budget deficit that is currently being proposed, then to keep increasing that deficit without knowing whether or not the money will be spent, if you like, just ends up in a situation where we're constantly having to review a situation which we know is wrong before we even start, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Deputy Town Clerk. Councillor Howe, please.
Just a question for the Deputy Town Clerk, that the building maintenance reserve is at £136,000. I'm just looking at the management accounts, and the reserves have got, just checking whether that date's right. It says the 31st of March 2020.
Yes, the reserves are actually set at a single point in time, so they're basically they're set at the point that the financial accounts are agreed at year end.
And so, well, I guess theoretically we have up to £136,000. Either we decide at the end of the year just to take the deficit out of general reserve, or we look to take it out of the building maintenance reserve. And then look to build that up slowly, which I guess is a point for the finance committee.
Yes.
But there are theoretically up to £136,000 that's been set aside for this.
There was at the start of this financial year on the depending on what finance committee agree next week, then potentially the costs incurred in the current financial year could be taken out of that reserve.
Okay.
So it could be lower by the time next year's budget starts. If you see.
Okay. Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Thank you, Deputy Town Clerk. Can we vote on confirming the fifth draft proposal then, please? Thank you. 8.2 designated reserve requirement for 2021-22 in Appendix A. Does anyone have any issue and any questions or suggestions? Or can we approve?
Councillor Howe has his hand up.
Councillor Howe.
Thank you. Just a question on, I think I would like to propose a reserve for Holy Trinity / public monuments, thinking about things like the clock tower and just unexpected maintenance that we could be asked to spend. And I guess I guess I'm proposing that we keep the building maintenance reserve primarily for the town hall. Obviously, the cemetery allotments have their own reserves. And I think I'm proposing the creation of a new one specifically for Holy Trinity and public monuments. I'd also like to, and I think I would like advice from the town clerk or deputy town clerk on. I guess we've now got potentially a £15,000 to £20,000 charge, and so I guess it's it's unfortunate that it's happened, but it's happened at a point where we can actually plan that expenditure in potentially for the next financial year. However, we may not, if it happens on the 1st of April, for example, we may not be as lucky, and so potentially that reserve should be up to £20,000. In addition, I'd like to propose a reserve for street furniture at £5,000, which was roughly the cost of the bus shelter. And I think that gives us flexibility in the future to, within a financial year, if there is an overwhelming need for more street furniture, then we have that flexibility without having to wait for the next financial year. And yeah, thus ends my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Does anyone have any comments, or would anyone like to second Councillor Howe's proposal? Councillor Cleave.
Sorry.
You...
Yeah, I think that sounds very reasonable. Based on what Deputy Town Clerk said about putting in additional amounts and how it'll affect the overall budget, I still think that those are reasonable, because it looks like costs we will incur anyway. So having them in that, especially for the Holy Trinity Gardens, having those additional reserves, the money is potentially going to be needed anyway. So separating them, it actually sounds like a very reasonable idea. So I'd like to second Councillor Howe's.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Just point of clarification on, I agree entirely with the designated reserve for the Holy Trinity Church, but actually what we're saying for this year is that, I mean, we're going to discuss it now, but I think we're going to need to put 20,000 in the budget for this year. And in addition, addition, we will have another 20,000 as in the designated reserve. That is my point. I think, you know, we could do this, and then another section of wall could have the same thing happen to it in 3 months' time, and we're stuck with no budget to do it. And so I think having that. The designated reserve is long term, not just for funding this.
Absolutely.
This That's right. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Voss.
Yeah, can I just ask for clarification? If we had part of the town hall wall collapsed for whatever reason, be it a lorry driving into it, crumbling away weather, would we not look at an insurance claim? And if that is the case, when we're talking about such extreme sums, why aren't we looking, or is it not possible to look at insurance claims as a possible way of defraying some of that expenditure? I mean, if it was 2,000 or 3,000, or if it were the Tranquility Wall, we know about the issues here, but when we're up to 20,000 plus and more, and possibly a series of issues, are we not able to look at insurance there, or is that not in any way covered and not worth even the ask?
May I answer that?
Yeah,
certainly, Madam Town Clerk.
That's a very good point. With the work that we've always done on Holy Trinity Church, we haven't been covered by insurance, but I mean, we will certainly look at it, because absolutely, you know, we're covered for insurance when somebody drove into the Garden of Remembrance. Whether we are or not, I don't know, but we will certainly check it.
I mean, our insurance expert sitting on this panel will tell us more about it. It may increase our premiums somewhat, but, you know, as Councillor Howe has pointed out and endorsed by Councillor Jackson, this could be a never-ending series of £20,000, couldn't it? So, you know, we need to see if we can use the insurance for what it's possibly there for. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Voss. Councillor Fradgley.
Along slightly similar lines, when I was reading the report, slightly disturbed that some of this damage was done by removal of ivy. I was just wondering who gave permission for that removal of ivy. Was there a risk analysis done at the time? And the person who removed it, or the institution that removed it, do they bear any responsibility in sharing some of the costs?
Thank you, Councillor Fradgley. Does anyone know?
No. There was, if you like, a gentleman's agreement with Holy Trinity Church, who have a group of volunteers who were supposed to do little more than beautify the churchyard in terms of, you know, just planting, etc., etc. And when that started, that was absolutely fine. What we haven't got in place, and which is what I have it at the bottom of my report, is to say, now I need to go to Holy Trinity Church and actually determine either that they stop immediately and that they never do anything else. But I haven't actually got any proof that it was them. So this is a question of it certainly wasn't our staff. And that side of the boundary wall is actually not our responsibility either. It's the Upper Avon Navigation Trust. But we've cut down the trees now because they don't. But you know, you can imagine a wall that age. It's been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and ivy is part of its cement, really.
Yeah,
so it is unfortunate. But I think in terms of the Coventry of Diocese, we would be foolish to even start trying to take them on because we wouldn't get anywhere. But we've learned a lesson, unfortunately.
I was going to say, I hope the lesson is learned, and we, you know, shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted a bit, but to make sure that if anything like this happens again, we've got to do some sort of fairly blue sky thinking about the responsibilities there and making sure that we're protected going forward. Yeah.
Personally, my recommendation to the church was that they have to stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we have the burden of maintaining this churchyard, which I think we do to an exceptional degree, and therefore, you know, they just cost the taxpayer £20,000, and we can't get out of that. That is one of the things about a closed churchyard, that despite the expense, you have to keep your boundaries in good repair. So
yeah, there should be some sort of responsibility that they need to discuss any activity that's happening there. They need to discuss it with us because we're carrying the can for it. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Fradgley. Thank you, Madam Town Clerk. Can we vote? Does anyone have any more comments, or can we vote for the approval of Councillor Howe's proposal then, please? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Item 9, the Town Clerk's open report. Madam Town Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really, the report that I wrote in the paper and the secondary document that I issued yesterday following my site visit, I think actually I haven't really anything further to add to it.
Okay.
From when I was sort of trying to squeeze the architect to give me a figure, I said, right, well, you know, I'm going to recommend to council that they put in 15,000, and he said, ask them for 20. If I was quite scared about that meeting because Stephen is a very good conservation architect. And in terms of conservation cost comes at a cost. But they were both of the agreement that there was no point in or necessity to rebuild the wall from scratch, to dismantle and redo it. But it's certainly, now that it's sort of, you know, been exposed, it's not dangerous, it's not going to subside, but little by little it will be eroded if we don't put something in place very quickly. So he has suggested that we get on with it in 2021 as soon as possible. But both of them work well with Sibbersbridge, and as do we've got a good relationship with Sibbersbridge, and we've used them a lot. That first of all, Christian Golding comes to Holy Trinity and has a look, because I think it's a question of taking down the top layer, and it's not as huge a section as you may, probably some of you have seen it. It looks worse because when you go in, there's some zealous boundary barriers there, but it is this one particular corner. So I'm hoping that 20,000 would do it. There are other areas of the wall that are perhaps not as aesthetically pleasing as one would like, but there is no thought that it's going to subside.
Thank you, Madam Town Clerk. Councillor Howe.
Just a clarifying question, just based on earlier discussions. It is the Avon Navigation Trust that is responsibility for the side of the wall or the entirety of the wall?
No, it is our responsibility is the wall.
The wall, yeah.
Completely. But once on the river side of the wall, the bank, the vegetation, etc., that's actually the Avon Navigation Trust's responsibility. I need to actually speak to them because they should be cutting the trees back, etc., and they don't. We do that. Mm-hmm. But we're happy to continue to do that because we've got the control, if you like. But we will need their permission to put
scaffolding.
Mm.
Yeah. I'd like to propose, therefore, that we plan to do these repairs in the next financial year, and we budget £20,000 to do that. And I'd actually like to see that separated out in the budget. I think there's one for general maintenance. I think it would be nice to have that as a line item to say this fixing the wall, 20k. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Howe's proposal? Councillor Voss?
Yeah, before we go to that, we've talked, and I'm here, I hope you all realise, as a critical friend about Sibbersbridge providing the work at £20,000 plus maybe. Should we not be looking at alternative quotes? And referring to the Tranquility Wall, when we had a little confusion early on about quotes and insurance, and I know I've referred to insurance before, we used, was it Nerdins, who were able to maintain that wall, which is also in a conservation area and presumably has similar, if not the same sort of requirements. So I'm a little nervous about just going back to Sibbersbridge because they are good friends and we have confidence in them when it's this level of expenditure. So, you know, and I know it makes a little bit more work, but it does seem a lot of money. And I realise, again, it may not be up to that, and people are always cautious and they always, you know, go to the higher level of anticipated cost. And then if it comes in lower, we're all relieved. But I just use the example of the Tranquility Wall as a precedent where we did go and we found very satisfactory alternative quote, and the work was done in a very competent way.
Thank you, Councillor Voss.
Mr. Chairman, may I just respond to that, please?
Yes, of course.
I don't think it's a question of being mates with Sibbersbridge, and certainly we're not shy of doing some additional work. What we are trying to ascertain through our retained architect and structural engineer, how much it's going to cost and what actual work is required, which we genuinely don't know at this time. So they've said, let's go to Sibbersbridge because they work with them, church works with Sibbersbridge, etc., etc. Let's find out what actually has to be done and how much they think it's going to cost. And then, yes, depending on how much it is going to cost, then we can actually go out and get the alternative quotes.
Thank you, Madam Town Clerk. Thank you, Councillor Voss. Councillor Cleave.
Thank you. Could I just ask a question? Because we've talked about the bank obviously being the Avon Navigation Trust. We as a town council obviously are responsible for the maintenance of it. Who actually owns it? Is it Holy Trinity that owns it? The wall, yeah.
Yes. Anything within that churchyard belongs to the church. But unfortunately, because it's a closed churchyard and the town council took it on, then the maintenance and all of it is our responsibility. And we have to pay for it. Yep.
Yeah. Have we ever looked at, because you were talking about obviously with the architects talking about it as a conservation project. When I've been to other places that have conservation projects, there's always a donation box for a particular project. Is that something we could look at that maybe the church could have? Obviously at the moment they can't open it, but as a separate conversation, is that something that we've ever looked at? Is it a way of raising funds?
A very simple answer to that is no.
Oh.
I think we would be hard pressed the church is raising money for the church.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Holy Trinity Church, and I think from their point of view, they're very lucky that they've got a town council who will make this churchyard to the best of standards. They are very clear when we've asked them, for example, to help with grit or something in the winter, or emptying the bins when we're on leave or something like that. It doesn't happen.
I thought
it's very clear cut. You're responsible, and if we like what has actually happened, it's cost us. And they just don't want to get involved with something that could backfire on them, really. And that I can understand. Yeah. If the council had not taken on the closed churchyard, it would have gone through the responsibility of the district council.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I thought that would be the answer. Thanks for clearing that up, Madam Town Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Cleave. Thank you, Madam Town Clerk. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. I think Councillor Voss was referring to me as our insurance expert, but I must be honest and say that commercial insurance of church premises is not my area of expertise. But I do agree that we should add this as an extra action point, actually, just to check the policy to make sure whether there is any cover, and if there is cover, that we include the insurance company in the ongoing investigations from the earlier stage. That's got to be best advice. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Howe's proposal then? Thank you, Councillor Cleave. And can we vote on that then, please? Thank you. That's unanimous. Item 9.2, to discuss the quotation received for the continuation of pin curbs at the cemetery, Appendix D. Does anyone have it? Councillor Voss.
Well, I probably can't go straight to Councillor Cleave, because I think we're going to ask the same question. So I will defer to her.
Councillor Cleave.
No, I don't know if it will be the same, but thank you, Councillor. No, we obviously, as we talked in the earlier item when we were discussing the budgets, if this is purely aesthetic and not necessary from a safety side, I think at this point we should potentially put this off, especially bearing in mind what we've just discussed about with the wall. So while the quote itself looks like a decent quote, I personally think that right now we should be putting that on hold if it's not a safety issue.
Thank you, Councillor Cleave. Councillor Howe.
From memory, it is a safety issue because it stops people running over gravestones, and I see no reason to do part of the graveyard and not the whole graveyard if that's the case. But I'm happy for it to be discussed.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Mr. Mayor.
I think that the question as to whether this is essential or not is a bit by the way. I think what we agreed at the beginning was that this committee would ask for the money to do the work. And if we then were told we didn't have the money, then this might be one of the things we could step back from. So I think we should ask for the money. I just want to check, can I just check with Deputy Town Clerk? We've got £14,000 in the budget. Are we saying this is an extra 7,500 to be added to that 14, or does the 14 include this as well?
Sorry, as I alluded earlier, apologies, my report was based on a previous version of the budget. So the latest version we're looking at, the 14,000 does include 7,500.
It does include it, yeah. Okay, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Voss.
Yeah, I'm not sure that these curbs will stop people if they are driving badly, which is what Councillor Howe's referring to, going over gravestones. And I think they are probably more, there is a sort of protective element, but they are more aesthetic. And I would say if we are going to have some hard discussions about where we spend our money, then we do need to look seriously about whether or not we spend it this year, when things are going to be very tight. We're not going to have any additional income. We can wipe that out. Anything we get, even one small hiring of the town hall, will be a bonus. So I think we do need to look very, very hard about what is essential expenditure, what is going to be the best expenditure for the whole of the community, the town of Stratford-upon-Avon, and whether or not it is essential or not this year. That's not to say we shouldn't plan to do it at some point, but I do question, in comparison with other areas, whether it is wholly essential.
Thank you, Councillor Voss. Councillor Howe.
Yeah, just to clarify that it is for that purpose, because the point is that when you hit something when you're driving, obviously I don't have the experience that my colleague has here, that if you hit a bump that you stop, and the intention is that the bump is the curb and not the gravestone that you've just knocked over. By
the time you've hit that bump, you're over the curb. You're just muttering about the damage to your car.
Depends on what speed you're going at.
Yeah. Well, okay.
But my proposal would be to include the work, the continuation of the work within this next financial year, noting that this is sort of up till March 2022. So it's still quite a long way off theoretically, that this putting it in next year's budget could still mean that this work is still quite far off.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Rolfe.
Thank you, Chair. I tend to agree with Councillor Howe. This is the last bit of quite a lengthy process, and I think I mean, yes, aesthetics is a lovely word, but I do think it's essential. I think it, we are renowned. The Town Council are renowned for the wonderful keeping of our cemetery. I mean, it's always been positive comments, and I would just like to see that last bit finished off. So I would certainly back Councillor Howe's proposal here.
Thank you, Councillor Rolfe. Councillor Fradgley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not averse to this going forward in the budget, but if the Finance Committee come back and say that we do have to trim our expectations, then I would say that this is one of the first things that we'd be looking at to put forward to 22-23, if not 23-24, depending on where our finances are.
Thank you, Councillor Fradgley. Councillor Cleeve.
Yeah, thank you. What Councillor Fradgley said, I think that's good. I mean, whether we can, as we said, asterisk it, as Councillor Howe said, and what he's saying is true. That I don't know if we've got records of is there lots of issues with people driving into the graves? Is that sorry, I've missed that. So if it is essential, then that's a very different issue to just from, as we said, aesthetics. But if we could push it to potentially March next year, the end of this budget, so put it within our budget, but say with a proviso going only if we still have the money, things have improved and it's there, but make it one of those as the last resort issue as opposed to plowing ahead with it, because I think, as we were talking earlier, things like the Holy Trinity Wall are going to be more vital right now than the curbing. So I'm happy for it to stay in, as it's already within that budget what we're going to ask. But as Councillor Fradgley said, if something has to go from this year's budget, maybe that's one of the things that does have to go, and we'll make sure it's then a priority if things get back to normal the following year.
Thank you, Councillor Cleeve. Councillor Howe.
Just another request for the Deputy Town Clerk, just to separate this out on the budget as a sort of cemetery curbing, as opposed to the existing category, which eludes me temporarily. I think it's just general maintenance, isn't it? General ground maintenance. I think it'd be good to see this curbing project as its own line item as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Voss.
I would agree with Councillor Fradgley and Councillor Cleeve, and I would support the proposal, but to include those two caveats.
Thank you, Councillor Voss. Deputy Town Clerk.
I would just following on from Councillor Rolfe's comment, I would just draw attention to the report that actually this isn't the final piece of the curbing. There is further work to be done at the front of the cemetery beyond this. So it completes the work down to the car park, but there is potentially still further work at the front of the cemetery to be done. Thank you,
Deputy Town Clerk. Madam Town Clerk.
I'm just glad that the Deputy Town Clerk has said that, because my concern, and this is light-hearted, the cemetery foreman, who I have a lot of time for, has said that this is his great ambition to see the whole of the cemetery curb before he retires. So I hope that it doesn't happen quite yet.
But surely, Town Clerk, we should extend this job for as long as possible then, to prevent him from retiring.
Thank you, Madam Town Clerk. Mr. Mayor, did you wish to?
I was just going to make exactly the same point. Let's confirm it and
okay.
make sure he never retires.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In that case, then, we have Councillor Howe's proposal. Councillor Rolfe has seconded it. Can we vote to accept that? Obviously, with the caveat that we, excuse me, that we carry it out towards the end of the financial year budget. Thank you. That's unanimous. 9.2, to note an update to the conversation regarding the signage in the Garden of Remembrance and Holy Trinity Churchyard in order to tackle antisocial behaviour. I presume we've all seen the updates in the notes. Lisa, would you like to give us a brief update?
Yeah, it's just what's said really. That was the email I got back from the Stratford Police when I asked the questions that were raised at the last meeting. So just to note and to, I don't know, see how you want to go forward with it really.
Thank you. Councillor Fradgley.
There are considerable issues sort of around this area of town. I've actually set up a liaison with the police and with the district council to have a weekly meetings at the moment about issues which are happening around this area. This kind of forms part of it, but a sort of fairly minor part of it. But I'll actually be pursuing any issues that residents report to me with the police at those weekly meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Fradgley. Councillor Cleave.
Yeah, mine was just to do, it was more the dog fouling issue that was at Holy Trinity, the two confusing signage. So whether we could look at those, because the outside one said, if I remember correctly, it was there was just a fine if your dog was fouled inside the churchyard, whereas as soon as you go inside the churchyard, there's a sign, don't walk your dog in here. So that could be, that's quite confusing. So whether we could look at something to do with making our signage a little bit more clearer for people as well.
I think that's a very good suggestion, Councillor Cleave. Councillor Rolfe.
I still have lots more of those signs if you want to have them all over the Garden of Remembrance. They're not particularly attractive, but they do state there is a large fine. If I don't know whether we have any spare ones in the town hall, but I still have some spare here.
Thank you, Councillor Rolfe. Councillor Cleave. Oh, right. Councillor Cleave.
Yeah, sorry. I think who enforces the fines though? That's my question. How do we enforce that?
Well, if I can answer that, unfortunately, the dog warden has to see it in action, so to speak. Sadly, and if it is seen in action and there is a sign saying no dog fouling, then pictures are taken and that person is fined. So far, the district council have only ever fined one person.
Wow.
You know, really not very good. But I mean, it literally, you know, the dirty deed needs to be caught in action.
Thank you, Councillor Cleve.
May I just
sure.
follow up? So, but the no dog fouling, if I can have a clarification on that, whether somebody can answer that, doesn't mean you can't walk your dog. Is that correctly? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, you can still. So that's where I think with the signs the disparity is. One just says no dog fouling, and that's just on the outside of the gate going in, and then there's a sign inside that says no dogs at all. So I think that's where we need to clarify as well on those two signs.
Councillor Rolfe.
Oh, maybe those signs should be changed round. I mean, in the sense that, you know, as you're walking your dog and you see that entrance and you see a sign saying no dogs allowed, that's more impactful than no dog fouling. So maybe the sign should be changed around. I don't know whether that's feasible.
Thank you, Councillor Cleve and Councillor Rolfe. Councillor Fradgley and then Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. Should we, I mean, I do not understand why anybody takes a dog into the churchyard not on a lead. I think if you insisted that dogs on the lead, it gives the owner of that dog more handle on picking the poo up, as they should be doing. I just wonder if we had dogs not allowed in the churchyard without being on a lead would help.
Thank you, Councillor Fradgley. Lisa.
Yeah, I think it's the sign that's in the churchyard which is more confusing, which I think the idea behind it was to not let your dog off the lead, but it says do not exercise your dog within this precinct, which I think Tony, the outside spaces foreman, actually finds that quite ambiguous. So maybe it does just need to be clearer on what we're actually saying.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Howe.
Yeah, I think it's quite extreme actually to say that there's no dogs allowed in the churchyard. It's quite a common. It's a nice walk. It's quite a common thoroughfare. It's a route that I do on my daily allowed exercise quite often. And if my wife were to allow me a dog, unfortunately she does not, I would probably want to take my dog on that route. But yeah, so I propose that we change and emphasize the fouling aspect of the signs within the churchyard.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Deputy Town Clerk.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just to confirm a couple of points there. As Lisa said, I think the sign talks about exercising. The current sign talks about exercising your dog in the churchyard. It doesn't say keep your dog on a lead. I don't believe dogs are banned from the churchyard. I hope not, because otherwise I break the law most days. It's on a regular walk for me. I would say that I have witnessed people who let their dogs run loose. I think the problem that the cemetery team have, the open spaces team have, is that dogs that are let loose to run through the churchyard are fouling on. And I have challenged a couple of people when I've done it and basically just get a load of abuse as to what the hell is it to do with you? Or pardon my language, but you know, you just get abuse if you ask people to keep their dogs on lead. So perhaps if the signs are clearer as to that's what is being requested, then perhaps people will be more likely to comply.
Thank you, Deputy Town Clerk. Councillor Rolfe.
Yes, we've just received a WhatsApp from Mr. Mayor, who has kind of exited the meeting but didn't mean to exit the meeting. Can somebody let him back in, please?
Right.
Thank you.
He's not in the waiting room currently, but I'll keep an eye out.
Trying to get back in, but
yeah, he said he was thrown out, so that was.
He was thrown out. That's
thrown
right.
out. So it might be a technical issue.
Wasn't me.
Councillor Voss.
Just to go from, just made the point about dogs and the lead. On the .gov website, we know that's where we go for all our information now. Controlling your dog in public. It's against the law to let a dog be dangerously out of control, such as in a public place, in a private place, garden house, the owner's home. The law applies to all dogs. And it has this coverall, make someone worried that it might injure them. So the law on that is really quite clear, and it's definitely a cover-all. And the implication is that if a dog is off a lead, it is the owner is potentially at risk of prosecution. Now, we may need to make that clearer, but I don't think it's something new. And that is a way of enforcing, if necessary, people who do let their dogs off leads. And that applies to whether they're in the fairs, the church gardens, or in the middle of Stratford. So, and this is something that often gets confused. Dogs have to be kept on a lead, and people who let their dogs off leads, even for the best possible reasons of exercise in big open spaces, can be considered to be breaking the law and are at risk of prosecution.
Thank you, Councillor Voss. Do we have a proposal then from Councillor Howe? Do we have a seconder? Or does anyone have a... Councillor Cleave? Sorry, Councillor Fradgley, yes, yeah.
Could Councillor Howe will his proposal include we should have signage requesting dogs to be on leads? Will that be possible?
Absolutely.
Fine. Very
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Cleave, you seconding? Yeah, thank you very much. And can we vote on that then, please? Thank you. And the date of the next virtual meeting for the Community Services Committee will take place at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 6th of April, 2021, or at 6:30 if we have a physical meeting, which I don't think is going to take place. I'd like to thank you all for participating, and for everyone that's viewing, thank you very much. Have a good day.